Welcome to Universal Man. My name is Mark Weppett, and I'm here to help you stop screwing around and play a bigger game with your life so that you can win where it matters and become a man that you admire. And today I'm back with another installment of the Man of Action series. In this episode, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be teaching you how to become productive like the apex predator of this planet that you are. In essence, I'm going to teach you how to go from operating on a fear-based prey-style form of productivity to a goal-driven predator-style form of productivity. So instead of being that guy who can only get himself to study for the test the night before because he's afraid of that bad grade lurking, you can instead be that guy who only needs a quick review because he's already consumed the material. Instead of being that guy who spends his whole day grazing on low-value dopamine bullshit like porn and video games and internet surfing, you can instead be that guy who is hungrily pursuing and hunting down his big goals. So if this sounds like something you want to accomplish, well then make sure you watch this whole video. And if you want to take this process to the next level, then make sure you check out my Vanguard community in the link below. In it, I help guys live on the front lines of their lives. I have there's a lot of stuff. There is an exclusive podcast that I release usually at least twice a week. There is a mentoring call that you can come on live every week. There is a priority Q&A where you can ask me direct questions and I'll think about it and I'll record an answer for you. There's also a chat room and a forum, and it's just the community of awesome guys who are making awesome progress in their life. So if you really are serious about this work of becoming a man of action or any of the other stuff I talk about in this channel, then you absolutely want to check out the Vanguard. The reason I'm bringing this up right now in particular is because the guys are actually giving me a hard time saying, hey, Mark, your Man of Action series is blowing up, but you're not plugging the Vanguard hard enough. And so here I am. I'm plugging it. Check it out. Okay, so let's get into this. All right. So when we're talking about productivity, there's a lot of different things that we can look at. We can talk about planning, clarity, mindset, motivation, all this kind of thing. But if we're going to kind of boil it down, the underlying metric for productivity we need to concern ourselves with, I would say, is time on task. Meaning, are you actually spending time doing the stuff that is most valuable to you, right? Well, that's the problem that most of us run into, is that we're not doing that. We're not spending our time on that stuff. Instead, we're spending our time doing who knows what, some kind of escapism, some kind of low value stuff, hiding, whatever, distraction. There's a lot of different things that we can get caught up in today that are not the things that actually move our life forward in any meaningful manner. And why is this? Well, part of it's just, easy, but I'd like to get a little more technical with it. All right. It's like, I would say there's three pieces that create what I would call activation resistance. Okay. Activation resistance meaning that resistance you feel to being productive. It's like, I know I should work on this project, but I don't wanna, all right? There's a few different things involved in that. One is just inertia, or you could call it homeostasis. It's your brain's desire to be in a kind of comfortable state. Okay. And it's like the object in motion tends to stay in motion, but the object at rest tends to stay at rest. And if you are at rest, it's very hard to get yourself in motion. Once you start getting some momentum, it's a lot easier to keep it going. But, that's what we struggle with. Sometimes you'll get momentum and then you'll lose it. And then it just takes so much effort to get yourself back on the ball again. Okay. That's one piece of the activation resistance. The next piece would be mental load. Okay. It's kind of like, imagine that you have to kind of pull a weight depending upon what you're trying to accomplish. Okay, it's like, imagine you got a sled and you're attached to it like a sled dog almost, and the amount of weight on that sled is your cognitive load. And the heavier it is, the harder it is to get yourself going. And cognitive load is kind of, I think, made up of two different things. One is the number of variables that you have to hold in your head while you do this thing. So for example, if you're doing anything complex, anything that requires you to think about multiple different decisions, multiple different avenues, just the more variables, the more working memory you utilize, the more resistant you're going to be to usually doing that kind of thing. Sometimes, not always. The other piece, though, is the emotional load. So if you have any fear, anxiety, worry, or just a desire to do something else entirely, that's also going to add to the load. And the higher that load is, the harder it is to get going. And then the final piece is what I would say is motivation. So if we've got this sled, it's built up with all this weight on it, or less weight, depending if it's a less taxing task, we then still have to take into account the incline. And this is what I would call motivation, right? Motivation is kind of like a neurochemical phenomenon, meaning how much is our dopaminergic system lined up with the task at hand. If you're really pumped about the task, like, say you're playing a complex video game, maybe you're really into like Dota or, Overwatch or something that, it's technically a very high cognitive load to do these complex games, but you're super motivated. That's like basically having that heavy sled, but you're pointing downhill. It's not a big deal to get that thing moving. But, if you're going uphill, it gets much harder, right? If your dopamine system is not hooked into the process, right? And so what most guys struggle with is when they are, what it feels like they have a lot, they're standing still, they've got a lot of weight on the sled, and they're facing uphill. And this is how they feel a lot when it comes to time for them to do something productive. They just feel stuck. And it's this stuckness, this inability to break this kind of activation energy to kind of get going. This is what keeps a lot of guys from really being happy with who they are, because they're just not doing the things that they know would make things better for them because they feel stuck. So the question is, how do you get yourself to move through this resistance? How do you get this sled going, moving up the hill? And this is where what I would call prey-style productivity comes into play, okay? And this is a method of generating that energy to get you going when you otherwise would rather not, okay? And this is fear-based. So like I was talking about in the intro, the guy who can only study for a test when it's the night before. All right. At that point, there's fear. Oh, I'm going to get a bad grade. Oh, I'm going to fail out. Oh, this, that, and the other is going to happen. That fear, it activates him. It gives him the energy and the motivation to start pulling that sled and start doing the hard work that he doesn't want to do. Okay. And this can work, but it's not the best way for things to work, because it really requires you to be in a bad situation, right? If you can only work on something, if you've got a boss breathing over your shoulder threatening to fire you, well, that might keep you from being fired, right? But it's not going to let you chase your long-term goals, because a lot of long-term goals, they're not immediately threatening. Nothing bad will happen to you if you just push off the gym one more day. Nothing immediately bad is going to happen to you, so there's no fear being activated, and you can't go forward if you're in this prey-based mentality. And this is where I think a lot of guys are stuck. They're stuck in this, only knowing how to get themselves going out of fear. And so what a lot of people will try then, they'll realize this isn't working, they'll get real fed up with themselves, and they engage in what I would call self-predation, meaning they try to scare themselves. And they do this by being kind of mean to themselves. They're saying, oh, you're a piece of crap. Oh, you got to do this, or you're pitiful, or, and they try and get really worked up and mean and negative to themselves. And sometimes they can get themselves going like this. They can actually attack themselves enough that they can scare themselves into action. And some people, sadly, end up even reaching a level of success acting this way. But the problem is, whenever you're self-attacking, you're damaging yourself, and you're always going to set yourself up for some kind of negative consequence, whether it's some kind of burnout. A lot of times it's usually, though, just some other kind of escape, like someone who gets themselves to perform by being mean to themselves. Well, that person likely has some kind of intense escape mechanism that they use to get away from themselves, because they're being mean to themselves, like, oh, you suck, you suck, you suck, you suck. Eventually, they're just going to want to tune out and stop being them. And this is where people, develop all kinds of addictions, like drug addictions, sex addictions, whatever. That's why you see a lot of, successful artists, if they haven't learned how to motivate themselves healthily, well, then they self-attack. They maybe reach some success, they still don't feel good about themselves, and then they turn to drugs or sex or whatever to make themselves feel better, and then, all kinds of bad stuff happens. Other people, who would usually be deemed as less successful, refuse to attack themselves, but they also don't know how to motivate themselves, so they just kind of don't do anything with their lives, right? And I don't really know which one's worse, to be honest with you. So what can you do? All right, what can you do if you've got this activation energy, that's this resistance that's holding you back from being very productive, and you don't want to attack yourself, and you don't want to rely on fear to get yourself going? What are your options? Well, if you don't want to rely on fear, well, then what you have to rely on is intensity. This is the path of the predator, okay? Instead of relying on fear, to get themselves going and active. The predator, they use the intensity of their desire, and there has to be a hunger involved. And through this intensity, they generate enough proactive intensity in pursuit of a goal that they can break through their homeostasis, break through their resistance, all right? And so you have to learn how to gather your own psychological intensity, do it on purpose, raise it up, and poof, bust through, okay? It's kind of like hyping yourself up before a lift, something like that, okay? It's like you need to learn how to raise your focus and intensity and learn how to do this consistently. Because that's the trick. If you can learn how to consistently raise your intensity of focus, then you will consistently be able to break through this resistance and do good things. So how do you generate predator-style intensity and therefore productivity? Well, it's pretty simple. There's a few different things that I'll cover here, but it's all kind of the same idea, is that you gotta try and you've got to focus, right? So let's talk about a very kind of small block of productivity. All right, here's how you would do it. First, you got to know what you're doing. And I'm not really covering planning or whatever, but I'm assuming you know something that you want to be doing, you should be doing, etc. Okay? Next, you're going to pick the amount of time that you're going to spend on this task. And you have to pick amount of time. This is what I would call your focus block. Okay? And you got to have a block. It has to have an end time. And it has to be an amount of time, like don't pick this amount of time with your ego. All right. It's got to be a amount of time that you could do. Like if you're someone who is pretty unproductive, pretty undisciplined, whatever, probably something like 20 to 25 minutes would be a good fit for you. Okay. It doesn't need to stay here. But like as your strength grows and your comfort grows with this kind of stuff, you can go longer and longer. Like for me, usually when I work, it's 90 to 120 minutes usually. I could go longer. Sometimes I do work less because I have odd shaped days at times, but you can work up to something like this. And to be clear, this isn't the Pomodoro technique, all right? The Pomodoro technique, for those of you who don't know, it's like 25-minute focus, 5-minute break, 25-minute focus, 5-minute break, 25-minute focus, 5-minute break, longer break, then you go back to it. That's way too robotic. I don't think that that's the best fit for most people. I'm talking about pick the amount of time, the full block that you want to be productive, okay? And by having that, it's like if you know it's going to end, then that gives your kind of emotional mind permission to release some more energy, right? So that's the first piece. Pick the amount of time, know what you're doing. Next piece is you're going to set yourself up. Okay, you're going to set yourself up before you get started. So that means already go take a piss, get your coffee if you're doing something at the computer. Make sure you turn off your TV, mute your cell phone, whatever. All right. Remove the distractions pretty much. And doing this, it kind of becomes a sort of ritual, all right? And it also flows into the next piece here where you can kind of psych yourself up. You can tell yourself, hey, I'm going to be going into my focus block here soon, and you're starting to ramp up the intensity. It's a feeling in your nervous system. It's actually it's like in the same way that you can flex your hand, you can flex your willpower. And what you're doing is you're starting to warm up your willpower, okay? And if you need to, you can even do some breathing exercises like whew, get yourself hyped, get yourself get the blood flowing, stress things out a little bit. You might not even need to do this kind of stuff, but if you build the habit of doing it before going into a focus block, then you make sure that you don't go into the focus block flat. Okay. And this is powerful because, after you get used to working intensely, it's easy to slack off and to go into it flat and then to end up distracted and whatever. I've wasted focus blocks before because I got too comfortable and I didn't raise my energy enough before going into it. Okay. If you're going to listen to music, then select the music and get it going. I actually now, when I'm doing really focused stuff that requires a lot of thinking, I actually do white noise or pink noise. And you can find big, playlists on YouTube of all different kinds of white noise. And that actually helps me focus more because I get too into the music. I start searching different kinds of music and it ends up becoming much more distracting. But, a lot of people like to listen to music while they do stuff. And if you're doing stuff that doesn't require a lot of cognitive energy, well then, have at it with the music. Just pick it beforehand. Don't be fiddling around with it too much during the focus block. Oh, one more thing. Have a place to capture all of your ideas, all the things you want to do. Like something's going to pop in your mind. Hey, I should look this up. Or, hey, I want to look at this app. Or, hey, I got to go do this, that, or the other thing. Okay. Have a place to write that down. Just write it down and then go back to your task. All right. And that allows you to avoid more distractions. But anyway, once you do that, start the timer. I really think you got to use a timer. It's a powerful, powerful psychological effect. I remember like when I was a kid, a lot of times I would have chores that I had to go do, and I didn't want to do them. And I had 3 younger brothers, so I would try and get my younger brothers to go do them. And it was pretty easy. All I would do is be like, hey, can you go vacuum this thing for me? Because that was my chore or whatever. And they're like, no. And I was like, come on, go ahead, try it. I'll time you. And for some reason, as soon as I said, I'll time you, and I took out my little watch, they'd like sprint off and try and do it, because for whatever reason, your brain likes it when there's a game aspect to things. And using a timer makes it a game aspect. It makes things like a game very, very easily, very, very quickly. And so do that. Now, here's probably the most important piece of a focus block, okay? You want to do the thing, do the productive work, or do nothing at all. And this is something that I heard I was doing kind of intuitively, but I liked that Neil Gaiman, I don't know how you pronounce it. He was doing an interview with Tim Ferriss, and he was talking about this. Like when he has to write, what he does is he goes to his writing spot, and he tells himself, he gives himself a rule. It's either you can write or you can do nothing, and that's it. All right, and that's actually a brilliant rule, because like you need to know that you have a choice. Okay. And because your emotional mind doesn't like being forced, it doesn't like being coerced, it doesn't like being bossed around. And so if you give it a choice, be like, hey, you can do nothing. Like you can sit here and stare out the window, you can sip your coffee, or you can do your task. And eventually your mind, it might want to just sit there for a little bit. And that's fine. If you sit there your whole focus block and don't do anything, well, then chances are you actually really needed that downtime. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later. But like usually your mind is going to get bored, and it's like, all right, actually doing the work is better than just sitting here doing nothing any longer. And to be clear, it's really doing nothing. You can't take your phone out. You can't browse the internet. You can't start chatting with someone or whatever, okay? That's breaking the rule. That's distracting yourself, okay? And that's entirely breaking the focus, right? But giving yourself permission to do nothing actually allows you then to self-pace your own breaks. So a lot of times I'll go to a coffee shop, I'll set my timer for an hour and a half, and I'll work, right? I'll work until I feel like things aren't clicking, and I'll stop. And I'll sit there and I'll do nothing. I'll just sip my tea or my coffee or whatever I've got, maybe go to the bathroom, sip some water, and I'll sit there. And then I'll start working again, and it feels amazing. Sometimes I'll sit there for 5 to 6 minutes. Sometimes I'll just, chill out. But basically the idea here is that if you create a set amount of time and you have a ritualized process that ramps your brain up into a focused mode where you then remove distractions, but then you allow self-paced breaks and the ability to do nothing or do work, that generates a huge amount of intensity. And that intensity will help you break through that activation resistance, and you will be productive. Congratulations. And what's cool is as you do this regularly, you improve at it. Your focus improves. Your ability to, like if you're working on a continuous project, that becomes easier and easier and easier because your brain gets more populated with it. You get more momentum. Instead of starting flat-footed, it's like, oh yeah, I'm picking up where I left off last time, and it's much easier to kind of get back into the groove. Instead of going up a, hugely inclined hill with that super heavy sled, all of a sudden it's a not so heavy sled and it's, more even ground. It's much easier to get yourself going. But like I said, also you get stronger and stronger and stronger, and you get to go for longer periods of time and all that good stuff. Now, I would always recommend not going too long. Don't push yourself to the point where it's really starting to you're starting to hate it, because you want to like these focus blocks, and eventually you will come to like them. But you got to be humble with the amount of time that you're going after. And you'd be surprised if you're doing truly focused work, you actually don't need nearly as much time as you think, opposed to, going to study when you're just, really just surfing Facebook, bouncing around the internet, whipping out your cell phone, texting, doing all kinds of stuff like that. You might have been studying for 3 hours, but maybe done, 15 minutes of disjointed work. So it's like, when you're actually focusing, you don't need nearly as much time. So you might be saying, wow, Mark, you're super original. You came up with the idea of time boxing. Well, time boxing works, and that's what we're talking about here. But I'm talking talking particularly about like time boxing is more about just how you use your time. I'm talking about how you use your brain and how you interact with your goals. You have to be intense if you're going to go after them, and it has to be in these kinds of chunks. Now, you might be thinking, oh, I should be doing this stuff all day. I need to be, going at peak speed all the time. Well, here's where we start getting into the obstacles here. All right. There's a few different obstacles that keep people from doing this kind of focus. Because most of us, we know that we could do this. Everyone knows that if they really set themselves down and really focus for a short period of time, they could be extremely productive. But a lot of people, they don't do it. And there's a few different reasons. One is mindset. Mindset's a big one, but I kind of already covered that in the last two Man of Action series. One is, the people think that they don't want to do it. It's like, oh, I don't know. They're just like thinking negatively and all that kind of stuff. So you got to learn how to do brain bridging, which I cover in Man of Action 3. And then you got all kinds of self-doubt issues and self-rejection and, bad form, very self-hating forms of motivation that often are unconscious. And I cover how to overcome that in the Man of Action series. So assuming you have your mindset on point, more or less, there's still one big issue that keeps people from showing up and focusing intensely on their goals. And I would say it really comes down to overtaxing themselves, being overextended, overstimulated. We've all heard about how the modern man is, physically sedentary. His body is undertaxed. Well, I think the modern man mentally is way too overtaxed. Okay, there is way too much stuff going on mentally constantly. We're always connected because of technology and society the way it is today. And this constant connection, it has actually a very significant cost. And I would say this cost, it kind of goes, you could argue it's like three different kinds. It's like we got a recreational cost, a social cost, and then a work cost, all right? Like recreationally, we've all got fun in our pocket. We all got all kinds of memes. We've got porn. We've got video games. And whenever you're constantly reaching for that kind of stuff, it takes a toll on your brain. That release of dopamine that's going into your game or your meme or the porn or whatever, that's dopamine not going into your goals. It's also focus. It's also time. It's all this stuff, right? Same socially, we're always texting, we're always on social media, we're doing that kind of stuff. And then for work, it's always like one more email, one more meeting. Oh, I got to do 80 hours of work this week so that I'm cool, and that kind of stuff. The problem is when we're constantly at like a medium level of like personal vibration, if you want to call it like that, like medium level of energy output, that makes it so that it's very difficult for us to raise ourselves even higher to go into those intensely focused blocks of time. Okay. It's kind of like, because the reality is we can't just get by with one focus block, right? Most people need multiple focus blocks done on a regular basis, consistent basis, multiple times a day in order to really become the person that they want to be. Okay. And you might know that you could do one, but could you do all that you need? Probably not, especially if you're constantly bombarding your brain and taxing and that sort of thing. It's kind of like, if I tell you, if you got like a sled with like 300 pounds on it, and I say, come on, man, 10 more feet, you could probably muscle it out and make it happen. But if I say, come on, man, 10 more miles, you're going to stop. You're not even going to go 10 more feet because your brain is very energy conservative in the sense that like, if it feels like it's not going to go all the way and it's not going to be worth it, then it's not going to go at all. And so a lot of people know they can focus for at least a little bit, but they don't focus at all because they know, judging by the way that they spend their lives, the way that they feel normally, they're not going to be able to generate that kind of intensity with the frequency that they would need. And so they just give up and they don't do it. Or they try and they just keep trying to go barrel full steam ahead with all of the stimulation, all of the internet, all of the video games, all the porn, all the Netflix, and all the focus as much as they can. They just go. And they might have some success for a period of time, but guess what? Eventually their brain's just gonna be like, nah. That it's gonna feel like there's 2 tons on that sled and you're just not going to focus. You're not gonna do it, especially when things get a little bit more difficult and challenging, okay? So we gotta watch for this stuff. We have to figure out how can we overcome this overstimulation issue. So what I see to be the key to consistently generating high levels of intensity so that you can always activate and always be intensely productive is tranquility. The more intense you want to be, the more tranquil you will need to be. So think about it like this, all right? I would say most people today, they have what I would call a cardio style productivity ideal. They think that, they just like their whole day should be like one big run. If you're doing a cardio style workout, that's what you do. If someone's like a long distance runner, they just go run for hours and they don't stop, right? And we fetishized this sort of ideal a lot with these super long work weeks and things like that. And don't get me wrong, when you're good at this stuff and you know how to manage yourself and you're very strong and you've got, you learn how to play the game super well, you can have many hours of work. But I would argue you probably don't need to, probably don't want to, and you're probably better off if you didn't. So what we have to shift to is what I would think of as a strength style productivity ideal, all right? And so instead of one big long chunk of time where you're running the whole time like that, we want to shift into like how you would run a strength workout. And how do you run a strength workout? Like let's say you have a deadlift workout, all right? You're going to be lifting something heavy. You're going to be doing maybe 5 sets of 5. That's a classic strength workout. So you're going to do bursts of high intensity with what in between? Rest. The heavier that weight is that you're lifting, the more you're going to have to focus on rest in between, right? Good luck trying to do heavy deadlifts and then in between your deadlift sets, like doing sprints and jumping jacks and all other kinds of exercises. But this is what we try to do constantly. It's like you try to focus for a little bit, but then you go jump on the computer, you talk to your friend, you play some video games, you watch some whatever, you do all this stuff. And it's time for another focus block, and you're just like, I really don't wanna. And then you don't. So as you can see, or hopefully you can see, that this stuff goes very much hand in hand with the dopamine detox ideas that I introduced at the beginning of this Man of Action series. If you wanna do more, you have to do less. If you want to move faster, you have to actually go slower. And this might sound overly simplistic, or it might sound trite or whatever, but it's the truth. That's the only way it's going to work. You need to have more margin. You need to take stuff out of your day. You need to take stuff out of your head, because then when you're not intensely focused, if you're chilling, you're regaining energy mentally, physically too. I mean, you got to get your sleep. All right. That goes without saying. If you don't know about sleep, then, go watch the Joe Rogan interview with the sleep expert, or listen to Tim Ferriss has a whole bunch of stuff about sleep, or I'm sure you could just Google it. You need sleep. It's about as important as it gets. But after that, you also need just quiet, tranquil time, right? When was the last time you sat down and just had a cup of coffee? That's it. I saw an old guy doing this a little while ago at a coffee shop, and it struck me as weird. I was like, what the hell is that guy doing? I was like, I actually thought he was doing something wrong. And I realized how screwed up I'd become with this modern society to look at someone just drinking a cup of coffee and thinking that they were a psychopath. Right? No, that's what you should be doing. You should be doing stuff like that. Turn off the radio. Don't have a freaking radio go all day. Don't have a TV go all day. I can't stand it. People do this all the time. They literally keep something in the house going constantly. This is all that stuff. Your subconscious is picking up on. It's listening to it. It's all energy being spent on that. That's going to then make it harder, make less energy available for you going into deep, intense focus. And it's going to disrupt your tranquility, your rest, all this kind of stuff. Learn how to have quiet. Learn how to have peace. All right? Like, learn how to eat breakfast slowly. And in order to do that, that means you have to get up early. That means you have to go to bed earlier. And that means that you probably have to, not spend 3 hours watching TV the night before. And this stuff feels like a major sacrifice at first, right? But it's that sacrifice. That's what resensitizes your brain. That's what frees up your dopamine so that you can then invest it into chasing these high value activities. Instead of, like I was saying in the beginning, instead of grazing on low value dopamine bullshit all day, you can instead spike your energy up and really invest it in the stuff that is most intensely valuable and useful to you. As you get good at this kind of thing, then you realize that you'll actually be able to get multiple focus blocks in your day. many actually, 3 to 4, sometimes even 5, depending on how much space you have. At least one, possibly 2. Even if you work a full-time job, you might be able to get a morning one and an evening one. It might not be super long, but you add that focus time up over the course of a month. That's a lot of stuff done. And it's fantastic when you start living this way. It really is. Like, I've become obsessed with trying to figure out, how can I get peace? How can I get quiet? And don't get me wrong, it's not easy. It takes some doing. It takes some engineering because, it's like I got a small little baby right now, and she wakes up at all times of night and she needs constant attention and all this kind of stuff. But, chances are there's some stuff that you can cut out of your life, right? And that's what this comes down to, is you take stuff out. You don't just plug it right back up. Let the space exist, all right? Like, you look at a serious strength workout, okay? A lot of times people will rest 5 minutes or more between sets because they know that they need that rest if they want to generate maximum intensity. You look at the strongest people in the world, they have lots of rest. In the same way you look at most apex predators in the, out in nature, what do? They lounge around all day. And then they get super serious, super focused, and they go kill something, and they go back to being pretty chill. And they'll have plenty of energy too to do whatever kind of social stuff they are, jockeying and dominance hierarchy, all that kind of crap. But we got to do that as well to some extent. But you're going to be way better at it if your brain is in a state where it's ready to go. And to do that, you need to have tranquility. Now, there's a lot more that I can say about this, like how do you optimize these blocks and that kind of stuff. And if you're interested about it, I can do a video about it. Otherwise, it's definitely going to be in the course that I'm going to be doing on productivity here soon. But this is a big concept that everyone I think kind of intuitively knows, but most people don't really act on. Instead, they're just like, well, what if I just download another app? Maybe that will make me more. Yeah, that app. Or no, what about this little brain hack here? No, that'll be the thing that puts me over the edge to be really productive. No, it won't. No, it won't. You need to have tranquility and you need to have intensity, and you need to have those things every day as much as you possibly can if you want sustained productivity. You can bend the rules here and there if you're an extreme outlier, or you can get lucky for a period of time if your motivation's high. But guess what? It's not going to last, and eventually it's going to catch up with you. So I want you guys all to be able to intensely chase your goals and conquer all of them. And I also want you to have the joy of tranquility, the joy of space in your life. I want you to be that psychopath at the coffee shop who's just drinking coffee because it's actually incredibly freeing. And you become aware of how crazy everyone else is when you do this kind of stuff. So, all right, that's what I have for you guys today. Hopefully you found this interesting and useful. Very simple concepts, but sometimes you got to make concepts complex enough to be compelling because otherwise you just be like, oh, yeah, and then you immediately forget about it and you change nothing. That's how I was for 15 years or whatever. So hopefully I've made a case for it here. Let me know what you guys think below. Check out my Vanguard community and the link below as well. And play big. I'll see you guys in the next one.